Thank the gentlelady from Illinois. The chair would now recognize the gentlewoman from Indiana.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm going to follow up on what the Congresswoman from Illinois is discussing, which is facility, and I appreciate the laundry list that you just listed with respect to the security improvements or whatever happened with respect to Benghazi. But I have to ask you if you're familiar with the fact that in the wake of the 1998 bombing attacks in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, Congress passed something referred to as SECA, the Secure Embassy Construction and Counterterrorism Act, which requires the Secretary of State to issue a waiver if, under two conditions, if U.S. government personnel work in separate facilities or if U.S. overseas facilities do not meet the security setback distances specified by the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. The law specifies that only the Secretary of State may sign these waivers, and that requirement is not to be delegated. Was a waiver issued for the temporary mission in Benghazi and the CIA annex after the temporary mission compound was authorized through December of 2012? And did you sign that waiver, Madam Secretary?
I think that the CIA annex I had no responsibility for.
Was a waiver issued for the temporary mission in Benghazi?
So I cannot speak to what the decisions were with respect to the CIA annex. That is something that I know other committees.
But you acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course, but you put them together. I just wanted to clarify that I had no responsibility for the CIA annex, obviously.
If U.S. overseas facilities do not meet the security setback distances specified by the Bureau of Diplomatic Security.
The compound in Benghazi was neither an embassy nor a consulate. Those are the only two facilities for which we would obtain a formal diplomatic notification. And those were the only kinds of facilities that we would have sought waivers for at the time, because we were trying to, as has been testified to earlier, understand whether we were going to have a permanent mission or not. That means you have to survey available facilities, try to find a secure facility, and the standards that are set by the Interagency Overseas Security Policy Board are the goals we try to drive for. But it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do that.
If U.S. overseas facilities do not meet the security setback distances specified by the Bureau of Diplomatic Security.
In the immediate aftermath of a conflict situation, the temporary mission in Benghazi was set up to try to find out what was going on in the area, to work with the CIA where appropriate, and to make a decision as to whether there would be a permanent facility. So we could not have met the goals under the Overseas Security Policy Board, nor could we have issued a waiver, because we had to set up operations in order to make the assessments.
I mean, obviously it was not enough.
As to whether or not we would have a permanent mission, whether that mission would remain open, and we made extensive and constant improvements to the physical security, some of which I mentioned before.
Madam Secretary, thank you. So it is obvious that a waiver was not signed, and you've given a defense as to why a waiver was not signed, and it was temporary because it was made up. It was something different. The compound had never become official. And so therefore, you did not sign a waiver, which, when most of our people are stationed in such dangerous places, let me get into that with respect to the dangerous places. We know that Libya, you've testified before, was incapable of providing host nation support. And that involves protecting our diplomats and other U.S. government officials who travel there. So if the Libyan people didn't have a government capable of providing security, and we didn't have U.S. military in Libya, then we have two options. We either leave when it gets too dangerous, or the State Department makes sure that they provide that protection. Acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course.
And I want to just chat with you a little bit about the fact that when Ambassador Stevens returned there in late May 2012, after being named the ambassador, less than 4 months later he was killed, but the number of violent attacks that occurred during that summer are off the charts. They're against Westerners. I'd like you to refer to tab 6. It is a 51-page document prepared by your head security guy in Libya for security incidents, serious security incidents between June 2011 and July 2012. 51 pages long, 235 significant security incidents, 235 attacks in 1 year. In Benghazi, there were 77 serious attacks in 1 year. 64 in 2012. Now, let me just tell you, as I flip through this, and I'm not talking Benghazi, as I showed earlier, it is a large city, about the size of DC or Boston. I'm not talking about violent attacks like everyday robberies, burglaries, holdups. I'm talking about assassination attempts and assassinations, bombings, kidnappings, attacks on the Red Cross. The Red Cross gave up and pulled out. The people who always go in when disaster strikes, they pulled out. That doesn't include 20 other major incidents. Bombings on police departments, the courts. Think about this. If you're in the city of Washington, D.C. or Boston, and we're now over in Benghazi, and all of these types of bombings are happening, and these security incidents are happening, there are hundreds more, actually, I could talk with you about, but frankly, I don't have time. I hope I've painted the picture because I'm baffled. You sent Chris Stevens to Libya and to Benghazi. And granted, he never raised the flag and said, I want out. And granted, he never said, shut down Benghazi. And I understand and appreciate that you deferred to him. But you also, Madam Secretary, we have no record of you ever talking to him. That you never talked to him personally after May of 2012 when you swore him in as our ambassador. Am I wrong? Did you ever talk to Ambassador Stevens when all of this was going on in the hotbed of Libya? Well, that is a yes or no question, Madam Secretary. I'm sorry. Did you ever personally speak to Ambassador Stevens after? We don't know the answer. Did you ever personally speak to him after you swore him in May? Yes or no, please?
Yes, I believe I did. But
when was that?
I don't recall, and I want to clarify for the record that this document is about all of Libya, not just Benghazi.
Absolutely,
I don't want anybody
no.
to
77
be
are
misled.
about Benghazi.
And, you know, Congresswoman, look, I appreciate, and I really do, the passion and the intensity of your feelings about this. We have diplomatic facilities in war zones.
But you acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course. We have ambassadors that we send to places that have been bombed and attacked all the time.
And you're their boss. Is that
you're right.
correct?
You're right, I am.
And you're their leader. Is that correct? But you acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision.
And are there ever situations where you call them, where you bring them in, where you are personally caring and concerned and are letting them know that? Are there situations where you recall, and I'd like to know what the conversation was with Ambassador Stevens and what month it was with Ambassador Stevens, because there are no call logs with him. There's nothing from the Ops Center with him that we have found. We have no record that you had any conversations with the ambassador after you swore him in and before he died, and you were his boss. Acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course. I was the boss of ambassadors in 270 countries. I was the boss
I mean, obviously, it was not enough.
of ambassadors in places like Afghanistan, where shortly before I visited one time, the embassy had been under brutal assault by the Taliban for hours. I am very well aware of the dangers that are faced by our diplomats and our development professionals.
I mean, obviously, it was not enough.
There was never a recommendation from Chris Stevens or anyone else to close Benghazi.
I didn't do it.
Now, sitting here in the comfort of this large, beautiful hearing room, it's easy to say, well, there should have been. Somebody should have stood up and said, do that.
I mean, obviously, it was not enough.
But that was not the case. And it is a very difficult choice with respect to any of these facilities, given the level of threat and instability that.
But you acknowledge you were responsible for the temporary mission compound.
Yes, of course. We confront around the world today, and it's deeply, deeply distressing when any of our facilities or our personnel are in danger. And we do and have done the best we can, and I think we can do better, which is why I implemented all of the ARB's recommendations, which we have barely talked about.
And
But those were essential in trying to improve and better position and prepare and respond, and that's what we tried to do. And, I find it, deeply, saddening.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
Because obviously everyone who knew him, everyone who worked with him, including Libyans, as I said at the very beginning, would have given anything to prevent this from happening. Our security professionals usually, in fact, more than 99+% of the time, get it right.
I didn't do it.
And Madam Secretary, if we would have given anything, had you talked to him in July, he would have told you that he had asked to keep the security in Libya that he had. He was told no by your State Department. We didn't give him everything. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlelady's out of time. The witness may answer the question if she'd like to.
Well, it's the same answer I've been giving all day.
Right.
Chris Stevens had an opportunity to reach me directly anytime he thought there was something of importance. The people with whom he worked, the people who were around him and with him, they very well understood the dangers that they were confronting, and they did the best they could under the circumstances, and many of the security requests, as I just detailed, were agreed to, others weren't.